Hi, I'm Robert Benict from Black Dog Custom Paint and Airbrush in Central Utah. Today I'm going to show you dynamic lighting effects, so let's get started. With this particular drawing, what I've done first is to indicate my light source, as you can tell by the arrow, and I've shaded it appropriately. Now, it took some time and it will take some thought on your part because you have a lot of curved areas involved with this and you have some flat areas. So at least a basic knowledge of some anatomy is going to be very helpful to you when you go to shade this drawing. The first thing that I did was I made several copies of them, about 5 or 6. After that, I've went and I've indicated light sources. In this particular drawing, it's from the top down. In some of the others, I've done it from the bottom right, bottom left, bottom, straight left, straight right, and so forth. Then what I've done is I've come back and I've shaded it appropriately. Now, a fairly decent knowledge of anatomy is helpful because you've got lots of curved areas on this skull. There are some flat areas, and it's helpful to know whether they are curved or flat, or what angle that they sit on in order to shade appropriately. I think I've done okay with this. I'm satisfied with it. So what we're going to do in this DVD is we're going to take each one of these line drawings that I've shaded, and these are rough, and I'm going to show you how to reproduce it with as much dynamic lighting effect as possible. What we want you to do is we want you to be not only a great artist, but we want your work to jump out and bite someone. And I think that we can help you with this DVD. Notice that in this particular line drawing, I've indicated that the light source is coming from the bottom up, and I've shaded appropriately. Notice that in this drawing, I've indicated that my light source is coming from the bottom left, and so I've shaded appropriately. In this drawing, I've indicated that my light source is coming from the bottom right, and I've shaded appropriately. After the last 4 drawings, you can probably tell where the light source is coming from. It's coming from the top left. Now I'm going to show you how to prep your surface for paint. For the purpose of this demonstration, we're going to be painting on a sheet of aluminum that's already been pre-coated with black enamel. The first thing that we want to do is we want to scuff up the surface really good. When you're doing this, just remember that paint does not stick to shiny surfaces. So make sure that you get rid of all the shiny surfaces. Just like that. Isn't that nice? Next step that we want to do is to get some degreaser on a rag. Now this degreaser can either be solvent-based or water-based. House of Color makes each one. I can tell you from experience that both work very good. However, I recommend a water-based degreaser on bare metal surfaces. Surfaces that are already painted, solvent-based is just good. And you want to make sure that you get as clean as you can get it because you don't want to do very much wiping or degreasing on your artwork prior to clear coat. So we want to get this as clean as we can prior to artwork so that we don't have to do a whole lot of cleaning afterwards. With solvent-based degreaser, you can let it air dry or you can force dry it with your airbrush. However, with the water-based degreaser, it's best to wipe it on and then very fast wipe it off. Otherwise, it does leave a film that could affect or even ruin your artwork. The next thing we want to do is to dry the surface. Now, with solvent-based degreasers, you could let it air dry and that would be just fine. But with water-based degreasers, you need to dry it off immediately. If you don't, it leaves a surface film which could affect and or ruin your artwork. Now, I'm kind of in a rush. Drying it off with the paper towel is great, but you can force dry it with your airbrush. That'll get you started on your artwork much faster. And let's face it, time is money. There we go. Now we're ready. Notice that I've taped it at the corners only. We're not going to tape it in between or worry about magnets or taping it from behind because it's a loose stencil. We're just going to use this to get our lighting reference. Using a lemon yellow, House of Color, what we're going to do is we're just going to create a little bit of dusted area. We're not worried about overspray because, let's face it, there's not a whole lot. And this is just for general reference. Notice it's a loose stencil so that I can see what I've got there. You'll notice that as I lifted it up, there are heavy spots and light spots. Some I can't see. The reason for this loose stencil is so I can put it back and go over those areas that I can't see. Now we don't want a real hard line because it's going to be hard to get rid of when we're going back and doing this freehand. So we just want a general idea of where those highlights are going. The great thing about the loose stencil is that I can go back and forth and I can check and make sure that it's light enough for me to see. Next, we're going to use a full cutout of the skull, and we're going to place it right on the edge, being careful to line it up with what we've already got. Okay, taped at the corners only. This is also a loose stencil. However, depending on how intense or how detailed your stencil is, you may have areas like this that are easily moved from one side to the other. So we need to take care of those. And I'm going to show you how to do that with magnets. What I have here are small magnets. Now this is a sheet of aluminum. However, if you were doing it on steel, you could just place it right there. But what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to put one on the front and one on the back in order to get it stick. Then we'll reposition it where it's supposed to go and place the other magnet. Now with my magnets in place, I can get a full outline of the rest of the skull. So using my lemon yellow, I'm going to lightly dust it in. And then we're going to check to make sure that it is dark enough for me to see. And it is. You can get magnets at just about any craft or art or hobby store in all different sizes. I've seen them from 1/4 of an inch all the way up to 1 inch circular size. We're going to remove that stencil. Notice that it's very, very light. Now that we have an outline, you can just barely see that. Well, the only thing that I'm missing now is an eye and a nose. So I'm going to take the inside section and with some tape, again using this as a loose stencil, again being very careful to line it up, I'm going to place it there so that I can know precisely with the other stencils. Using House of Color Lemon Yellow, once again, fine outline. We don't want to go very heavy because in the end these eyes are going to be dark. We're going to have to do it with black anyway. So removing the tape, I can see that I've got eyes. Now we're ready to go on to the next step. What I see a lot of custom painters do is to mask around the object that they're painting and then cut it with an X-Acto knife. Well, that's just fine, but it leaves an edge. And on this particular drawing, I don't want there to be an edge. I don't want there to be a visible cut mark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take Sign Maker's transfer tape. And I'm just going to lay it over the top here. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the stencil that we used for the outline of the entire skull. I'm going to place it over the top. Again, using the magnets, I'm going to hold down the areas that are really flimsy in my stencil. But we're not going to cut directly on the surface. And what we're going to do is we are going to create a mask because we don't want to mar it. Next, we're going to take House of Color Black in an airbrush. And we're going to lightly go around the outside. What this is going to do, this is going to leave the impression of the skull on the transfer paper. That is going to allow us to remove the transfer paper and cut this out on another surface instead of the one that we're working on. Then we'll lay it back on so that we have a sufficient mask that's not going to be marring the surface from a cut. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to put a piece of scrap metal or scrap cardboard or whatever you've got, something that you can cut on that you know you're not going to use again. We're going to remove the transfer tape off of our artwork. We're going to apply it to the surface to be cut on. Then I'm going to take an X-Acto knife and I'm going to start at whatever point I feel like and go around the edge of the drawing. Notice that my thumb and forefinger are the only thing being used here. And when I got to go around a curve, I'm basically just twisting the knife. And that makes a really clean curve. You don't want it really, really jagged. You may have to reposition your hand and start from another direction, but choppy flat areas are going to look really bad. So try to keep curved areas nice and smooth as you can. A lot of times what I like to do is to put it on my lap and cut it. That way I can spin the artwork. However, for the purpose of this video, I'm going to have to work for it. When we get this cut out, we're going to have a stencil that we can use to put over the top of our artwork. And again, we didn't cut on the artwork, so there's not going to be any cut marks. That's always a good thing. If you do have a plotter that has a PLT format on it, or a vector format that you can cut this out with, then you're doing great. Because you can cut it out in Gerber mask, which is a transfer type of vinyl, and it's already cut for you. You don't have to do all this work. But it's great exercise to do this work, because in the graphics business, or in the custom automotive graphics business, we do a lot of this all day, every day. Be as exact as you want to be, or as loose as you want to be. I'm being loose right now because I know that in the end, the edges are going to be very soft, and there's going to be a lot of freehand work in here. So I don't really care about being exact on this particular drawing. Some things are going to require you to be extremely exact. And in that case, take your time, because don't forget, your artwork is what you are selling. And the better it is, the better you sell. Once I've got this cut out, we're going to take this and we're going to transfer it from this cutting surface, which, by the way, is just a scrap piece of metal, as I said before, and we're going to put it over the top of the artwork that's on our panel. Make sure you don't destroy it, because we may want to use this. In fact, we probably will use the inside of this again to cut out the eye shape after we get all of the light colors done first. So be very careful when you're pulling it off. We don't want to destroy it. If you don't rub it down with a credit card or a squeegee or something like that, then it will pull off very easily. However, if you burnish it down with anything, credit card, squeegee, whatever, you'll probably end up destroying your stencil. So now we have our artwork back up here. What we're going to do is we're going to remove the mask, again, very carefully, because we don't want to mess it up. And this may take a little bit of practice, okay, especially on the detailed areas. Be very careful, because we want it to be pristine when it comes off. In some cases, this is obvious in this case, you may have to do it in two sections. What I did was I cut his head off, cut him right in half, and we're going to use that. And then we're going to get the lower part. If it looks like it's going to come off fairly roughly, then you'll just have to adjust. So what I did was I cut it in half. Not a biggie. It's not going to be here for very long, so it's going to be just fine. Careful to line it up pretty good. Like I say, I'm not real worried about getting it too exact, because I'm going to use a lot of freehand techniques. What I want to do is I want to minimize the amount of overspray that I get from the amount of paint that I'm going to put on this. So I got my bottom half of the stencil, or the mask I should say, and I had to cut it again, but that's okay. Like I said, it's temporary, and there's going to be a lot of freehand work in here. Now this one you're going to want to burnish down pretty good. We'll get the last piece of this stencil going. And there we are. Okay, it's not quite lined up. We're not really worried about that. And we're going to take care of that, and I'll show you how. All you do is take a little bit of masking tape, cover up the areas that are showing. The main thing is that this one is stuck down pretty good, because we don't want a lot of overspray. In fact, we don't want any overspray on this. And you don't have to stick the whole thing down, because remember, you're going to have to take it off. So the main part that we need to stick down is right along the edges there. And you can burnish it down with your fingernail. You can use a credit card or a burnishing tool that you can get at any science supply place. Call them squeegees. By the way, this green tape is a great 3M product. They make great products. And oops, I forgot to put these parts on. So make sure that you got all your stuff in place before you start doing that, or you're going to come up with some unwanted things. Like I said, you want to be fairly close, but you don't have to be very, very close. Not on this particular project. You're going to be using your freehand skills, and let's face it, that's where you want to be in the end. We're going to get you there quick. All right, now we're ready to start airbrushing. I'm going to use House of Color BC01, which is base coat white. And we're going to start off by reaffirming the yellow areas. So just a little bit, you can see them. If it starts to build up like that, you can just take your hand, that little overspray will go away. So we're going to reaffirm those areas that we did in yellow with the white. Just lightly, you don't have to be, except for the eyes. You don't want to do the eyes, you don't want to do the nose, because those are going to end up black. You don't have to be real exact, we're just reaffirming that with white. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to take yellow on top of the white, and we'll hit some yellow. If you were to not put that white on there, it would be a real greenish looking color, and yikes. And we may have to reaffirm this one more time. Remember to hit all the areas that you had before. Now it is a little bit green, so I'm going to reaffirm that with the white. Go right over the top of that yellow. Put a couple coats on there. Sometimes that is the best thing to do. Not too heavy, because we don't want to leave a paint edge either. We definitely didn't want to leave a cut edge, but we don't want to leave a paint edge either. So keep that in mind. Stay away from those edges if you can. Real light coats. This doesn't have to go on very heavy. You notice I'm not pulling back very far on the airbrush, and kind of staying away from the edges, and it's not taking very much. Let's go back to the yellow. Reaffirm our yellow. You see how bright that is? Now eventually we're going to go over that with Spanish gold candy, and that mixed with SG100, which is an inner coat clear, and it's a great product, by the way, because it's a base coat inner coat clear, which means you don't have the hassle of having to deal with something that's catalyzed. So that brightens that yellow up really, really well. The next color I'm going to go with is Candy Tangerine. Mixed the same way with the SG100. That part number is KK08. And notice that I'm testing it off to the side. I'm testing it so I can see what color it is. So what I'm going to do is, on all the dark areas, right on the verge of the yellow, is where I'm going to put this Candy Tangerine. Great stuff. I just love it. And that is making that merge. Just notice how that line went away. Notice we had a line there before where we laid the stencil down, and that line just went away. And the reason is because we didn't get very heavy. And that's exactly what we want right there. That was just looking too cool. Now what you can do at this point, we've got the warm colors laid down. We're going to start with some cool colors. This is what we're after. We're after dynamic lighting. Cool colors are going to be on the dark side, are going to be some of your yellows, greens, blues, violets, that kind of color. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start out with blue. And this is a House of Color base coat blue. Sometimes they tend to settle. So if it's not real opaque, give it a little shake up there. And then try it again. There we go. You see how that opaqued up real nice? And what I want to do is, on the farthest side, I want to get some blues in there. You get the light on this side, and then on that darker side, the furthest away, I want to put that blue in there. And then a little bit around the brow here. And you'll see this thing just start to jump out. A little bit in here. Get a little bit in there. That'll look great. Some up here in the front. Okay, notice that the eyes they still have the pattern there. Well, those are going to turn black. So that's one of the reasons why we need to put another color down here, is so the black holes will show up. Okay, again, it's better to do several light coats rather than one big heavy coat. Because if you put too much on there, there's no taking it away. I mean, you can, but it's going to lose its brilliance. The colors are going to lose its brilliance. So you really want to do this in one shot. The next thing we're going to do is use House of Color KK17 Violet. Now this is a candy, and it's really going to give this some punch. We're going to go right over the top of that blue. Now notice, if I put this straight on black, you're not going to see anything. It's very, very transparent colors. But once I go over this blue, it's really going to come alive. You can also take this violet and you put it right on the edge of where you put that tangerine, and that'll give it some red. There are a little bit darker areas. Boy, that is just looking really nice. I'm really happy with the way this is going. Now what we're going to do is we're going to get our drawing back out so that we can put in the small details that we need. Now remember when I told you to keep these stencils? This is why. Now we're going to use this stencil, and we're going to use a drawing that we haven't cut up for reference. You want to put it close to your artwork, and you might want to have it a little bit more on the same level there. Okay. When we go to airbrush, we're going to use this one, the one that's not cut up, because it has all these details in there. And we're going to use that to put these details in, okay? You'll want to keep it close to your other work so that you can have really quick reference to it. We're also going to use this one because it has the eyes cut out and the nose, and we're going to need that on this artwork right now. What you want to do is to line this stencil up, and see it lines up pretty good. It's a little off here and there, but remember, this is where your creativity comes in. You can do what you want with it. We'll get another House of Color black here, and fill it in. Not real heavy, but just enough so that you can see it when you take it off. And you will have to apply some pressure on this stencil to keep from getting underspray. But sometimes underspray is good, and you'll see. Watch this. This is going to look really great. Okay, we'll remove this stencil now and keep it because we are going to use it. See, now we got eyeballs. Nice. Now for the really fun part. You get to use your skills as a freehand airbrush artist. Using House of Color Lemon Yellow, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to reaffirm the details that are in this picture. Now you don't want to go too much, not too heavy. Remember what I said before when I said that a lot of little strokes better than one big heavy stroke. One big heavy stroke just may blow your artwork. Now the reason I'm looking at that is to get all those details there. Okay, I'm going to reaffirm yellow where I want yellow. Reaffirm it up in here. What I'm doing is I'm using this just to get that real hot spot there. And I think maybe I want some ribs or something like that in there. So I'm going to go ahead and put those in right now. That's going to look real cool. Okay, teeth. Gotta like teeth. All it needs is one little highlight on that one side of the tooth. And don't get discouraged if you can't get this right away. It might take some practice. And you keep doing this and you're going to be a threat, I'll tell you that. Okay, being careful to put the highlight on the teeth. Now in the dark areas, okay, in your cool areas, don't go real heavy. You just want to barely notice that there's teeth there. But in the hot areas, you want that to just really jump out. Now these aren't all the details. We're going to go back and we're going to put even some more detail in here. But you got to start at all your lower stuff first. Okay? Just remember, several light strokes is going to be a lot better than one heavy stroke that's going to destroy your work. You don't want to do that. I like these lines. They remind me of ram's horns or something like that. House of Color recommends that their base coats are mixed 2 parts color to 1 part reducer. But I think if any of you have done that, you will notice that that's a little bit thick to airbrush with, okay? Those rules are for custom painting an entire car. Okay, and it works great on a big gun, but with an airbrush, you might find yourself picking stuff off the end of your needle a lot more than you really want to. So what I try to do is I'll mix it exactly like it says on the can, 2 parts color to 1 part reducer. Then I'll over-reduce it by 1 part and to test it and see what its longevity is. See if I can sit there and airbrush for 5 minutes without there being like a sputter of paint. If so, it's good. If not, if I get a sputter of paint, I'll add a little bit more reducer. Now one thing that's going to affect that is temperature. If it's real warm where you're at, paint's going to dry on the end of the needle a lot faster than if you're in a cool place. Notice I haven't picked anything off the end of my needle. That seems to be a problem with airbrushing. And most of the people I teach go, "Oh, what's up with this, man? I get sputters." Well, that's what's up with it. Look at this thing coming together. Isn't that great? Now what I want to do is I want to take that Spanish gold again. I want to come back over those yellow areas and watch how it just kind of dulls it a little bit. Not so lemony. Makes it blend in really nice. Isn't that cool? And I can even go on those the dark sides too. Look at that. That's just great. I just love this. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to cut these little ribs out with scissors. Now be smooth on this. Smooth as you can. You don't have to go by it. If you get off of the thing a little bit, no problem. Now we're just going to use a couple pieces of tape here. We're going to tape it right where it goes. Right there. Next, I'm going to use Candy Violet right here, just along the edge, so you'll be able to see it when we take this off. Now, I didn't make much of an imprint on the darker area there, so I'm going to take some black, and I'm going to put some black right there. So put a little bit of black here, then you'll be able to see that. Okay, we'll remove this. And continue on with our freehand airbrushing. I like to put a little bit of black in here, right underneath, between the area where it turns to purple. Okay, reaffirm our black in the eyes. So what happens is the overspray that you're creating, okay, gets on the darker areas, depending on how much air pressure. Right now, I think I'm running about 25 psi. However, in my micro airbrushing video, we only run at about 5 or maybe even 3 psi. Be sure to get that. That's going to be a good one. Okay, I think that's enough black for now. Make sure that you keep the drawing that you originally did with the shading on it. Keep that in hand, because then you can kind of see some of the stuff that you shaded and what you didn't shade. Next, we're going to use Candy Tangerine, and we're going to reaffirm some of the midway areas, some of the areas between the violet and the yellow. These are the areas that we need to do our detail work in. And make sure that your pressure is low enough so we're not blowing paint all over the place. Right now I think I'm about 18 or 20 psi. Not too much. Doesn't take much air pressure. I'm looking over to my drawing over here and using it as a reference. This is the part that takes some concentration on your part. This is where you're going to use your freehand skills. Stencils are great, but you don't want to be a stencil artist all your life. Not that it's bad. It's a good thing to use stencils, but in the right proportion. And we'll come in here and put some details in here. you use this tangerine right, it makes incredible shadows and stuff. Can you see how that's shaping up there? Trying to reaffirm some of these areas that we had tangerine in before, but because of overspray and stuff, it kind of washed it out. And we'll get up here in the cheekbone area. Remember, it's easy. You'll see me go over one spot 2 or 3 times and test it out, on the area right next to it. But that's because I don't want to go too heavy on the first shot. Remember, you can always put more in, but it's harder to take it off. Use short strokes. Dagger stroke is your best stroke that you could ever have. And it's great. Get some in the teeth. That's just shaping up really good. Okay, we're going to move over here to his horns. Reinforce this area. And you may find that some of this might build up on the tips. You'll have to stop every now and then. Make sure that your equipment is working right. Just test it out on an area right next to their piece there. Get a few detailed lines in there. And a little shade on the bottom of the highlight. See that? And make those horns jump out. Now notice I'm going past the artwork right onto the mask. And that's okay, because if you can get your line going on the mask, just like this, and then onto your artwork, nobody even notices that. Okay? I'll pull that off anyway. Right, that's shaping up good. Now I'm testing it out here on the side, and I can tell that I'm having a small problem here. And what's happening is, normally the airbrush is very responsive. As soon as you pull back on the trigger, you're going to have paint. And what's happening here is I'm pulling back and I'm not getting what I want. And what I think the problem is that the paint is a little bit too thick. Sometimes when you're over-reducing house of color paints, they will tend to settle on you. So periodically, you'll need to shake them up. I already shook this up and I tried it a second time. It wasn't doing what I wanted to. So what we're going to do is we're going to reduce it further. Now, to correct the problem, I'm going to use RU311, which is a medium reducer, which is the product that I've used to reduce all of these paints for this particular piece. And I'm going to take that candy tangerine, and we're just going to thin it down a little bit. As far as reduction amount, you're going to need to experiment with the amount of reducer that you use. Use reducer to improve the flow of paint through your airbrush, and that's going to depend on your climatic conditions and also your air pressure. Okay, we'll give it a little shake here, and we should be good to go. Before I commit to the artwork, what I'm going to do is I'm going to test it out on the side. I've already got it reduced a little bit more, so let's see if this is actually doing what I'm wanting it to do. And yes, it is. It works. Great. Okay, now we'll return to our artwork. And again, we're just using short strokes. But we're trying to reaffirm some of the detailed areas in here. I think we'll do a little crack in this guy's skull here. This is where a steady hand really is not necessary. And if you take and shade a little bit on one side of the crack, it kind of gives it a little more dimension. It's kind of cool. This horn. Again, you can use the side mask area to kind of start testing. You're really not going to see a lot of this detail work till you get into the lighter areas. But start in the darker areas. There you go. I think we got what we want. Okay, we're ready to go on to another color. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take that blue, that light blue again, and we're going to go into the dark areas and fill in some detail with the cooler color. Okay, now we're using SG108, or So Blue is what they call it. And I've got it mixed fairly thin so that I can determine the opacity that I want this to be. And we're just going to reaffirm some of the details in here with the blue. Don't be afraid with color. Color is a great thing. Put a few details in there. Notice I'm having to go over the same area quite a few times, but I want it that way. Okay, we'll get this little lump here in the forehead. Blue is awesome. And the cool colors are going to look really, really good. Because not only are we lighting from the top down, but you've always got refractive light that comes up this way. And it's the cool lighting that we're working on too. Trust me, when it's on a black background like this, it's going to be really, really dynamic. So we'll come in here and do some on the teeth. Alright. A little bit more up here in the forehead. Now you don't have to use blue. You could use green and do this too. Or even a light violet. I'm just choosing this blue, and you know what? I might just put some green in here. The next color that I'm going to use is an olive green, which I've mixed up using the House of Color Yellow, Purple, and So Blue. Okay, we're just going to test this green out, and you'll notice that on white, it's really dark. However, if you put this same color onto a dark area, which we're going to do right here, it gets really, really light. Notice that? Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to come in here, and just in certain areas that are higher than others, and put this green in here. Highlight some of these areas. There we go. Don't be afraid of this color. You're not going to destroy what you got. You also want to give the illusion that there's some detail in here. This is looking good. Look at the tops of the teeth there. Kind of blend it up. Just remember, short strokes. Little is more. Just love these airbrushes. They're great. You do so much with them. Engineering is marvelous, marvelous. Okay, put a real light area up here. And then we'll do a little detail in these horns. Just kind of bring them out. Now remember, if you get this green into a light area, it's going to be really, really dark. And sometimes that can be okay. This will actually help you. See how that gets dark? Really dark. Not such a bad thing in this case. Really shape it up. Okay, I think we're done with the green. Get a little bit more in there. Let's do that. Shape to some of this stuff up in here. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to peel the back off, and we're going to see what we got. Chances are, around some of these edges on the dark areas, we're going to have to go back and put some highlights in there. And you can do it freehand with the airbrush, or you can take a real fine liner brush and put some little highlights in there just to kind of mark it up. Before we do that, we're going to go back and we're going to reinforce the black areas, which have turned a little bit grayish because of the overspray. What we're going to do is just reinforce a little bit of black. Not a lot, because we want that overspray to work for us, that kind of haziness. I'm not a real fan of black, not a big fan of black. I like to use like a really deep purple. But if I can use this overspray to my advantage, which I can in this case, and I'm going to, I'm just going to put black in just a few little areas here, just to kind of reinforce some of the shape of this eyeball. And then you'll notice in the middle I've left it light. If you put just straight black eyeball in there, it's going to look kind of weird. So just get a little bit here and a little bit there. You see how that kind of gave it a lot more contrast up in that area, and that's exactly what we want, some contrast. Use this opportunity with the black to fill in any small details that you want to do. Maybe a hole in the bone in places. Keep a constant eye on the tip there, and periodically try to clean it off with your finger. What will happen is you'll get paint dried up on the end of that. It won't work for you, right? Just getting some of the finer details up in here. Let's reinforce a little bit of the dark area here. Not too black. You don't want to ruin all that color you put on there. Just a little bit there. Get a little bit of dimension. And up in here, just a slight bit there. Okay, on the very last step that we're going to do on this is some white highlights. And actually, I'm not going to use pure white. That lemon yellow is actually, it's going to look very, very, very light, like I used white on this. So that's what we're going to use. I prefer to use, instead of a black or a white, like I said, a dark purple or a real light yellow. The last and final step to this is a yellow-white mixture that we're going to use to put the highlights in this. And that's really going to make this jump out. You'll have to be careful with this process because you don't want to overdo it. Little is a lot in this case. So you see this little white area right there, or it's not white, it's actually light yellow. We're going to put a fine little bitty dot in there. Again, test it to the side. And look how that just makes that little area come to life. Isn't that great? On the high side, we're just going to put very, very light. I mean, I'm not using much at all. And don't you either, or you'll destroy your painting. Just here and there. Up here in the horns, just on the high side. Look at that. That is just great. Keep checking your airbrush, because when you're airbrushing with such a fine amount of paint, it does have a tendency to dry up on the tip a lot faster than if I was just blasting. Okay, just on the high sides of these. Get a little dot and then some haze around it. That looks good. Just here and there. And even just little dots, like a little dot of pure color, helps out in areas. Doesn't take much. tops of the teeth. Just a little bit, not too much. And periodically stand back from your work and get a good look at it. If it looks good from far away, then it's going to look good up close. Okay, I think we're just about finished with the white highlights. But just to make sure, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a break for a minute. I'm going to introduce you to a really great tool that's going to help you out tremendously in your artwork. This tool that I'm going to use is called a reduction lens. This thing is very helpful, especially if you're working in a tight space and you want to look at your artwork from a distance. What it does is it makes your artwork very distant. Right now, looking through the glass, it actually looks like it's about 4 or 5 feet away, when actually I'm this close to it. By looking at this, you can tell whether or not this is going to look very good or very bad at a distance, and you can make whatever corrections that you're going to have to make just by looking through this. Now I'm looking at it, I like it. Next thing we're going to do is remove the masking and see what we got. Okay, now you don't want to take it all off kind of haphazardly. What I like to do is I like to take off a little section at a time just to kind of see what kind of contrast I got. I'm looking at it and that looks pretty good. Then on the dark areas, that's really the main focus here. We know that we're going to get good contrast and it's going to pop out on the lighter areas. But one thing we're not sure about is the dark areas. So we'll just lift a little area here and pull that area back. And you know what? I think we did a pretty darn good job. So I'm really comfortable at taking all the masking off at this point. Very nice. You want to do this slowly. Sometimes if you have too high of a build of paint, which we don't, but in some cases you might, and if you didn't scuff it real well, it might pull it right off. I use an X-Acto knife to get up underneath it so that I'm not picking at it. I don't want to ruin the artwork if I can help it. Now you'll notice that there's some areas here right along this edge where our previous stencil was. And I'm going to show you what we're going to do to take care of that. We'll get inside the teeth here. Be very careful not to scratch your artwork with the blade. Okay, I can see areas in here where what I call mismasked. And that's where you've got some light areas in here from the stuff before. Not a problem. I'll show you what we're going to do with that. Now I've got House of Color BC25. It's straight black, and we're going to do the touch-ups. Since the background is solid black, that's kind of an advantage. I'm using just a little bit of a paint to take care of those little areas. Just a little bit here and there. And where we've got this bone that kind of comes up in here, I'm going to take a little black and just kind of wisp it up in there so it looks like it blends in real good. Just like that. Boy, that guy looks nasty. We're going to do the same thing on the horn. First we're going to touch up these little areas here around the rim. The other thing that does is it gives it not such a hard edge, more of a airbrushed edge, and that's what we want. So here we go with a nice little line, just like that. Oh, it's great. Same thing around the edge here. Touch that up. Now, if you don't feel real comfortable doing this freehand, remember that you didn't destroy your stencil. So you still have your stencil. I'll show you another trick. You can take the stencil of this horn, place it where you want, loosely, airbrush it, and take care of that with the stencil. And like I said, using it freehand like this kind of gives that feeling of softness, not so stencily. Put a little bit of shading in there. If you see that it looks too hard, too light of an edge at this point, that's a good time to go in and do a little bit of shading in some of these areas. Doesn't take much, remember that. I'm using very little paint. Periodically, test it off to the side. May get some buildup. Depending on how thick your paint is, you may have to do that several times. So you're going to get in between the teeth. Right along the leading edge of that tooth. A little bit. Get a little bit more shading in there. That's looking great. Now if you had a background behind this, if it wasn't just a solid black background, then you would just mask it and leave that mask on there through the whole thing. Remember, we used some loose stencils at first just to get a basic idea of where our stuff was going to be. And then we went and we put that masking on. But if you have a background, it's good to do that masking just once. Then if you have to go back and touch up, then it's not so dramatic. Okay, so what I'm going to do right now, there's some areas up in here that I think are just a little bit too bright. So instead of using the black, I'm going to use some black later, but for right now, I want to use that Candy Tangerine. The number of that is KK08, and it is mixed with SG100, which is a balancing clear. But it's great stuff. And because it is a candy, you don't have to worry about going on that black. You're not going to see it. It's going to just absorb it, the black will. And I really like the way this is turning out. This is where we just do our last minute things. This is looking great. Also, that tangerine will help on the edge if you've got a little bit of overspray. Very easy to do. Excellent. Now I'm coming in with my black for the last time. And we're just going to do a little bit of shading up in here where I think it's just a little bit too hard. Just to soften up just a little bit there. Maybe on the edge of this tooth, soften that. Just some last minute shading to give it some depth and some character. Sometimes when it's all masked up, it's really hard to see what the end result is going to be against a black background. So I save my last little touch-ups or shades or stuff for the very end. Now in this area, I think I want that to be just a little bit more pronounced. So I'm going to use our loose stencil that we cut before to accomplish that. We're going to use that edge just like that. We're going to grab a little bit of the black again. We're just going to hit it very lightly right on the edge. Test it out and make sure it's working for you. Just like that. Not too much. Look at that, how that popped out. That was great. I love that. Now, the final thing that we're going to do with this project is we're going to wipe it down with degreaser again, and we're going to see what it's going to look like clear-coated. Notice that I'm wearing gloves to protect myself because this is a solvent-based degreaser. Look at that thing pop out. Isn't that great? That looks great. Now, what I'm looking for is any inconsistencies in this, overspray or stuff like that, that I might have to do before I clear coat it. If you look up close here, you can see a faint line from the freehand stencil, and we want to get rid of that. But I didn't see that before. So that's where that wax and grease remover comes in very handy. Now we're going to dry it off. I use a paper towel first, just to get the bulk of the product off. Don't be scared if you see a little bit of color right in here. This is just overspray. It's not going to affect your painting much. Next, what I'll do is I'll blow some air on it to get it to dry faster. Don't forget where your repair areas are going to be. You may not be able to see them once you get it dry. Okay, now that it's dry, test, make sure you got paint. So we'll take care of this repair area first. We'll just spray a little bit of black in there. And I think that'll do it. And then for this one, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the stencil that we had again. I'm going to place the stencil right up against our artwork and just black in that area. And same with this. I like freehand shields, but you're not doing a lot of taping. It'll do the same thing. It does take some practice to get used to the freehand stencils. Then we can just take this time to do any last minute adjustments. Sometimes on the edge,
if the paint is too high there, get a little bit of a ridge there. We'll just take care of that right now.
I think we've got a really great product here. Well, I hope that you take these tips and techniques that I've shown you here today, and you go out and you make lots of money with them. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.